welcome to another episode of Hope, hearing other people's experiences. Hearing other people's experiences is what helped me get well. So I've invited somebody very special along to share his specialist knowledge in the field of therapy, addiction, art as well. And he is an integrative specialist, is that right?
An integrative psychotherapist.
He's an integrative psychotherapist. There you go. I knew that I would get it out eventually. I would really like to just hear what you remember of how we met.
It's nice to be here. And it's great to see you.
It's great to see you.
We don't get to see each other that much. We met in a second stage rehab. And we were both quite mad. Mm-hmm. And I'd come out of a really horrendous 8-year relapse back into my addiction after many years of recovery. I got very ill and I had a lot of surgery and I spun out back on the drugs, which made me very angry because I just lost another 8 years of my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure why you were angry, but we bonded with anger.
We did, didn't we?
We bonded with anger and rage and our hatred of where we were, which actually really helped me a lot in retrospect.
Likewise.
At the time, I was not aware how much it was helping me. So we met there and we bonded over anger, and I think we had some mutual friends from the past.
Yeah.
And there was some sort of weird, removed connections.
Yes, and also with the art as well.
And the art.
Because I remember doing art therapy or a version of art therapy at that place, and it was the first time I felt any relief.
Yeah.
And then obviously you do that as well.
So my MA is in analytical art psychotherapy. Or it's in art psychotherapy, but with a very analytical
yeah. So you know why it gave me relief.
Yeah.
But I don't really know why it gave me relief. Yeah. I just know that it did. And I'm very grateful for that. So there's so many questions that I want to ask you. Mm-hmm. But first of all, I would like to ask, for somebody who has a friend or a relative who keeps relapsing, who can't stop using or drinking or doing what they're doing, are they a bad person, or why can't they stop, basically?
So they may be a bad person, they may be a wonderful person, and addiction doesn't choose between bad people and good people. It just is. And why they can't stop is where they tag the drug in their brain. Tag. So I'm gonna. Can I?
Yes, please.
So
I got it there. Just for you.
So right. Okay. So let's imagine a brain. A brain is like that. The sort of spinal column, and then you got the frontal lobe, and then you got the midbrain. Yeah. So I'm not an illustrator.
Look, I'm just very grateful.
Let's just go brain, right? Like that, right? Now, the brain is really complex. From the front, it's like that, and I'm going to rub that out because that looks terrible.
It looks like a bum.
But it's got a left and a right side, a bit like a bum.
Yeah.
And one side's about emotion, and the other side's about cognition. And so one side just feels, and the other side's much more about thinking.
Yes.
And this is very, this is actually a kind of like 3-hour, 4-hour lecture. So I'm going to do a really simple one.
Keep it simple.
I'm not a neuroscientist, but very basically, you've got a frontal lobe, right?
Yeah.
And the frontal lobe can make judgment calls. At 2 a.m., there's a bottle of tequila, there's some Coke on the mirror, and someone says, oh man, I think if I don't go home now, I'm going to fuck up going to work in the morning. Mm-hmm. And the frontal lobe will go, yes, you need to go home because otherwise you're going to screw up your job. Your partner's going to be pissed off with you. You need to walk away from this now.
Yeah.
You've had enough. It's okay. Sadly, drugs in addicts don't work in the frontal lobe. What happens in an addict is the frontal lobe shuts down in an addict. And they can't make those kind of decisions. Where drugs work in addict is in the midbrain. And the midbrain, so that when I say tagged, it's the midbrain in an addict that tags the drugs.
Okay.
And the midbrain's really only interested in 3 things. It's the really primeval part of the brain. So it's only interested in survival and survival of the race. So 3 questions. Can I eat it to survive? Should I kill it to survive? And it's not interested in romance and flowers. It's just basically, should I fuck it?
Yeah.
Prolong the race. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if what they discovered by putting an addict, and this is quite a hard one because there are very few people who want to pay for research on addiction. It's not, they're
Really?
much more interested in curing cancer
Well,
or
yeah.
doing stuff, and addicts are seen as a problem in society. So no, it's really that. But if you stick an addict in an MRI scan and a non-addict, and you shoot them up with cocaine, the midbrain lights up like mad and the frontal lobe dies in the addict. In
Wow.
the non-addict, that doesn't happen really. And what that means is now, when you say to someone, hey, listen, it's time to go home, and they see there's still some tequila left, there's still some coke on the table, they're like, what the feeling they have is, if I don't have it, I will die.
Yes, that I got a visceral reaction when you said that.
Yeah, they don't think that. It's not that clear, but they have that feeling. So now the drugs are purely about survival, which is why the bad person thing, right? So people go, but they put their drugs before their children. Mm-hmm. If you're on an aeroplane, who do you put the oxygen mask on first?
You.
So if you're dead, you can't look after your children. Hence, an addict will put the drugs, the substances, before their children, because if they're dead, they can't look after them. And then society looks at this and they go, these are bad people.
Yeah.
So does that answer that question?
Yeah, it
in
really
any
does. It does. And do you
Yeah.
know why? Because is it called the amygdala, the fight or flight, lizard brain?
Yeah.
Is that the same thing, or is
It's much more complex, and we could go. We don't have time to go into
That's
all
okay.
that. But the fight or flight is very much part of it, because fight or flight, you do go into the primeval brain, you do go into the midbrain, and people who are, there's a reason why the brain works that way, and that's huge. What sets someone up for addiction?
Yeah, I would love to
because-
hear about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you got to do is you got to look at society, and I'm sure we all know, I know plenty of people, God damn them, who take drugs socially.
Yeah,
It doesn't destroy their life.
can't get my head around that.
It doesn't destroy their life. It doesn't, they don't end up. People get addicted to heroin in hospitals. We know this.
Yes.
You get addicted to heroin in hospitals, and when you come out of hospital, for 90% of people, couple of sleepless nights, what they call hospital flu. It's not that terrible, but there's 10% of people for whom it's a real problem. Like people given oxycodone, 10% of them went on to become addicts.
Yeah.
And that's not because of the aggressive marketing of oxycodone, which we could discuss at some point if you wanted to. It's a huge one, but that's more because their brains were set up in a certain way for them to tag their substance in their midbrain.
So they
right?
were born with this.
That's a huge debate. I think people are born perfect. However, there is a huge correlation between children who, in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, their mothers were physically abused, stressed out, who go on to abuse heavy-duty stimulants, crack, crystal meth.
So
right?
there's a correlation.
So it's how your brain grows. It's really how your brain grows. I mean, should we go into...
Trauma?
Well, that is huge. So trauma and nutrition.
Yes.
Screen. So if I'm your child, I'm your baby, right? Okay.
Look at my big hairy baby.
Okay. I'm your big hairy baby. Okay,
Hello,
mummy.
sweetie.
Hello, mummy.
Yeah.
Right. As a baby, right? You will look at me, and I will look at you, and we'll make eye contact, and we'll feel.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
That's a chemical called endorphin.
Yeah.
And that is why children are tolerable to their parents. They're not to many other people, but they're tolerable to their parents. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive.
True.
So the brain produces endorphin when that happens, right? Endorphin
Yeah.
is
Just take your time.
Yeah. Well, let's just go like here. Let's just go. I don't know. So we've got endorphin, endo. I am chronically dyslexic.
So
I'm gonna
listen,
get all
I
this
tried
wrong.
to submit the plans for this, and my handwriting looks like this. So there you go. You're not as bad
And
as me.
endorphin stands for endogenous morphine.
Oh, I I had no idea.
Endorphin means the morphine your brain makes.
Right.
Right. So if you imagine that I'd grown up and mummy wasn't there, this is really simplifying it, or mummy was deeply stressed out, or mummy was having to work 3 jobs in order to support me and feed me and do all the right things. So she could be a wonderful mummy who's doing her best, or she could be stoned somewhere in the corner.
Yeah.
You know, it could be any
So she was
reason at all.
absent.
Then my endorphin brain isn't. So you know, the way your brain grows is a chemical gets triggered, right? So endorphin gets triggered, right? And that fires around the brain, your brain grows a little bit more. Then something else happens, and the brain grows a little bit more. So there are all these different chemicals. So you got endorphin.
Yeah.
Let's just do a few up here. You got dopamine.
Oh, yes, we like that one.
Yeah. You got GABA.
Yes.
And then you got loads of them. Serotonin.
Yes.
And plus, you know, they
Yeah.
just go on and on. Right. What are they? So when you look at those, what do you think?
I think like that looks like a fun time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look,
I mean, what you know, serotonin. What comes to mind?
serotonin, probably immediately I have an image of me on a beach frolicking in the sun.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And GABA. What's the first one?
GABA,
you wanna say?
I think of being like pleasantly pissed.
Right. Pleasantly pissed.
Yes.
There you go. Pissed.
I remember what that was
Yeah.
like. It was for a while.
So what's really interesting is you know, GABA. The big things, you know, gabapentin, pregabalin. They work on the GABA receptor.
Is that
Right,
when
so
people come
all these can be interchanged. All these chemicals we produce ourselves
Yeah.
can be interchanged with serotonin. The easiest one is ecstasy, MDMA, right?
Yeah.
That MDM. I mean, most of these produce, most drugs will produce a whole variety of chemicals.
Yes.
But let's say endorphin,
Coke.
morphine,
Oh,
heroin, right? Dopamine, alcohol and coke.
and then when you use alcohol and coke for like several days, if you've been on a bender,
Yeah.
is that why you feel
GABA.
suicidal when it runs out? Is because all your dopamine is gone?
Yes. Yeah, because your body stops producing it. If your brain, if you're getting it from an outside source, there is no reason for your brain to produce it.
Yeah, that makes a
Right.
lot of sense.
So when you're coming down, you crash because it then takes a while for your brain to start producing it again. But so if Mummy Dearest wasn't engaging with
Yeah.
me when I was like 0, 1, 2, 3, which is when my brain's doing most of its growing, I have no endorphin tracks in my brain. And if so, I will feel wrong, but I won't know I feel wrong
Yeah.
until one night someone goes, have a line of this.
Yeah.
And I have a line of that. And for the first time in my life, my endorphin system will be functioning and firing.
And you're like, what's this?
And I'm like, I feel normal.
Yes, I
probably
remember that.
vomiting and scratching and making a fool of myself. But inside, my body feels normal for the
Right.
first time. It's like, and it would be the same, line of coke. If your dopamine thing isn't functioning properly, you know, which is a lot of ADHD is about dopamine. Not all of it. There are 4 types, but a lot of ADHD is about dopamine. And if your brain isn't producing enough dopamine, you can't really focus. You can't, you know, it's like a traffic jam of information in your brain.
Yes, I know that one very well.
And someone starts saying, oh, look, I'm studying for my exams. And someone says, well, have some Ritalin or Dexedrine or Coke. And suddenly you can functioning.
Wow.
You're suddenly functioning normally. You know, why would you stop?
Yeah, and so the brain doesn't know that
Yeah.
that the brain doesn't have the option to stop, right? Did I get that right? Or?
Well, it doesn't really have the option to stop. And what you're doing is you know, I mean, it's far more complex. I'm really simplifying it.
That's
It's
all right.
far more
I'm a simple
complex than
kind of
me.
girl.
And there are loads of contributing factors to this. I mean, the massive contributing factor is nutrition.
Okay.
You know, and in order to sleep, you need melatonin.
Yes.
Melatonin is a byproduct of serotonin, right? Serotonin will turn into melatonin.
Yes.
Yeah. And in order to create serotonin, you need omega-3s and vitamin Bs.
Right.
So if you've grown up eating, am I allowed to say?
Stodge.
Am I allowed to name some companies? No. Well,
Just
we've all
stodgy
seen
rubbish.
Have you seen Super Size Me?
Oh yeah, God, that was a classic.
Where he only eats a certain brand of food, and
Yeah.
his depression becomes so bad.
Yes.
And that the doctors say he's got to stop.
Yeah.
So if you grow up eating food that
Like
has
that.
no nutrition, you don't have the precursors to any of these chemicals.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So you're saying that it's nature and nurture.
It's nature and nurture. I mean, what they say is it's epigenetics. Now, epigenetics are the genes that get turned on in response to your environment.
Okay.
You're born with a sheet of genes. Some are going to get switched on, some aren't. And that's to do with the environment you grow up in is what switches, and that's epigenetics, right? And they used to think there was an addiction gene because it tends to run in families. And
It
they
did in
realized
mine.
It's the epigenetics. If you're growing up in an alcoholic environment, you're probably more prone to alcoholism. So it's nature and nurture.
Yeah.
I think, and it's 100% of each. So apparently, what you need is some genetic predisposition, the environment that brings that gene out,
Yeah.
some form of trauma, and exposure to the substance that does it for you.
Yes, because I remember the first time that I had a drink, and it lit me up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that that's the cliche, but it describes it perfectly, because it's like, why didn't anyone tell me about this before? It's amazing. And then it's like, it became a problem because I feel like I'm actually allergic to alcohol and Coke now, because if I put it in my body, I get an allergic reaction, which means that simply it will make me mentally ill. I can't stop.
Yeah. Well, you can't stop because your body's saying, once you relight this,
Yeah.
if the first way to shut up the midbrain so that it's not saying you don't get
Give me
high,
this,
you're
give
going
me
to
this.
die, is to stop taking it.
Yep.
And that's incredibly painful.
Oh, yeah.
And then you've got to relight the frontal lobe, right? You've got to relight the frontal lobe. And you do that by getting meaning,
Yes.
connection, people, things you feel passionate about, life. And then you're able to make those choices of, if I do that, that might happen.
Yeah.
But up until that point, you can't really say no.
Yeah. So that's what.
So just say no doesn't work.
No. Well, that's so simple, isn't it? Like, why could
It doesn't work.
That's
It's
basically
completely ridiculous.
Exactly. So that's what I wanted to ask you is like,
Yeah.
that's the whole reason for this particular episode is like,
Yeah.
just saying no doesn't work on addicts. It doesn't. And the neural pathways and relighting the frontal lobe is fascinating, because I think all of the stuff that we have to do to relight that frontal lobe is effort, and it's not instant gratification. So addicts, we like our instant gratification.
Yeah.
We're used to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And so, I remember we were so angry because we just couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And meaning is right. And I've seen some of your artwork, Will, and it is very good, actually. You should go check them out. Here's the link right here. I don't know.
Thank you.
I'm wishing
Thank
for
you.
a lot.
No, I'm loving that. Go ahead, keep
just
going. Keep
there.
going. Someone might buy something one day.
Yeah.
All right.
So, how does art or your creative outlet help reignite the front?
So it's there's no simple answer. It's completely complex. There's all loads of different things happen. One is art is older than language, right? Mm-hmm. Art is older than language. So and it's a shared thing. It's a collectively shared thing that we all get, and it's something humans started doing decades ago. They started putting their hands and then spraying paint. So, and you see these in completely opposite sides of the world on caves where people would never have had a connection with each other. So it's something shared, it's something collective, is the making process, and also it's quite heavily informed by the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think one of the point of psychotherapy for me is to bring into the conscious what informs me from the unconscious or the pre-conscious.
Yeah.
Because everything we do it comes from back here. We don't know. You know, we just do things
Midbrain.
automatically. Well, further back, you know, just the unconscious parts.
Oh,
We
right.
are informed, our behavior is informed by something called internal working model.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. This is. I'm not going to go into this.
Break it down for dummies.
So basically, every experience you've had
Yeah.
informs the way you react and
Yes.
deal with things.
Yes.
Right? And we're not conscious about how we do that. So someone says something, someone does something, and it will trigger an emotion, a response, whatever. And that comes from that model. And if you can bring into the conscious why that model is that way, then you can start to change it.
Yes. It's
Yeah?
hard, but
so
you can.
if you go, I do this when that happens because historically this has been the outcome.
Yes.
Then you can go, okay, well let's try and get a different outcome from that.
Yeah. Trigger. Let people have triggers, or something happens and you kind of you expect a certain result because of experience you've already had.
Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about sounds a little bit like CBT. I've done a bit of that. So like you challenge your thought systems. Is that right?
Well, CBT is great first aid. It's great first aid, but I think you want something deeper than that. You want to go right back into the unconscious. I mean, CBT will save lives. It's a very, very good first aid. But it doesn't explain to you why you do what you're doing.
Yeah.
It just stops you doing what you're doing.
For a time.
For a time.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
maybe you'll find another way to do it. Like, you know, the guy who stopped smoking and then suddenly got arrested for shoplifting. Which never done. It comes out in another way.
Yeah, unless you deal with it.
So I think you want to go back into the
History.
yeah, but slowly, not fast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long journey.
And that's the hard thing with supporting an addict in recovery, is because they are going to be extremely impatient, because we're used to getting our fix and feeling great immediately, or, you know, feeling all right knowing that it's on the way. You know, I remember that bit. So, yeah, I think if we can know that they're going to be raw, they're going to be pissed off, and reassure
Early
them.
recovery, the first couple of years of recovery, I think are incredibly hard.
They're so hard.
And if you're a family member, you need tolerance.
Yeah.
Because first of all, you're the person in recovery is living in the reactive part of the brain,
Yes.
not the responsive part of the brain.
Yes.
You know, you've got a responsive and a reactive part of the brain.
So they're not rational.
They're not, they're just reacting, you know,
Yes.
without thinking, a bit like the government we have. You know, I mean, you know, where you just kind of react to what's happening in the Daily Mail or the Sun.
Oh,
Because you want, shut up, so we'll do this. And it's not thought out or considered.
It's a thought action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when we're addicted, I had a thought of using and then I did.
Yeah.
Now I have a few seconds in between.
Yeah. And the responsive brain is again up here where you can go, okay, well, let's consider this, you know.
Yeah. I would really like to know what you think about trauma and how it plays a role in addiction.
So, I mean, if you talk to people like Gabor Mate, they will say all addiction comes from trauma. And if you look at the ACEs study, and ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and you can just Google that. Yeah. And there are a bunch of questions on it. And it's to do with, you know, the environment you grow up in. You know, have you been subject to abuse, sexual, physical? Have you been, did your parents physically fight? There's a whole bunch, did you have long-term illness as a child? Mm-hmm. And what you find is you don't really find an intravenous drug user with less than 3 or 4 ACEs. You just don't get them. It doesn't
Adverse
happen.
child experience.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
You know, and they can go, I mean, I think there are 10 on the study, but you can add things like racism, disconnection from your culture, these, you know, at an early age. People who move around a lot, permanently disconnected, kids who grow up, whose parents are in the, so they're moving.
Army brats.
Army brats.
Yeah.
And these are, you know, and what we know is people with multiple adverse childhood experiences go on to get hypertension, they get diabetes, they get all sorts of illnesses, you know, blood pressure, they become obese, or they get eating disorders, and they get addiction. So they start processing. So you know, trauma, you know, and as I said earlier, you know, that correlation between the fetus and the mother getting
Yeah.
abused, that they will start so, and it's really the early years, the first, you know, and that, because that is going to define how the brain grows.
Yeah.
And which chemicals are going to be. So if you're permanently in trauma, then you're permanently producing cortisol and CF acting or CTS.
It's a horrible feeling.
And you're permanently like, and it's because that neurolink is going to be the predominant one that's grown, and you're going to want to come down and center yourself.
Yeah.
So trauma is huge, and resolving trauma is a huge thing.
Yeah.
For people in recovery.
Is it essential?
I would say I don't know the answer to that question. I think some people never look at their trauma and they go on to get quite decent recovery, and other people find themselves relapsing back into addiction, relapsing because they've never looked at their trauma, and it's permanently informing them.
Yeah.
You know, and PTSD, then you're living in the trauma as if it has just happened. It's like, it's not something that happened. It's something that's happening.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And complex trauma.
Yeah.
So it's always, I mean, sort of one adverse childhood experience, two adverse childhood experiences, one thing of trauma can actually set people up to be very resilient.
Yeah.
But multiple complex. What's interesting is when those people get into recovery, they have enormous resilience.
So the people that don't look at the trauma.
No, people who've had sort of these real knockbacks,
Okay.
and then somehow can get into recovery.
That's amazing.
They become incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
But more so than I don't know if there is a normal person, a regular John.
I'd love to meet this regular John.
Yeah.
I'd ask him all kinds of questions.
Because I think everybody's somewhere. You know, everybody's somewhere.
And it's all relative, isn't it, to what you've lived through?
Yeah.
You know, what you've lived through will be entirely different to what I've lived through. But, you know, for you personally, that experience for you was traumatizing. And for me, I've had lots of experiences that were traumatizing, but I kept relapsing because I refused to look at two really big ones.
Yeah.
And eventually I was just told to cut my crap.
Yeah.
and I'm so grateful that I was told that, because I faced it. It was brutal, but I'm sober. You know, I have been for 4 years. So it's unavoidable, really, for me. And I see a lot of people put it off and put it off and put it off. And I understand why, because they can be massive traumas, horrible, visceral things. I do have one more question about people who get into recovery very young.
Yeah.
I heard a theory once that if the addict is under 25 when they get sober or clean, they're able to later on in their lives use normally. Is that true?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. What I do know is that you know, if I don't know what age that would work.
Yeah, I heard 25.
What happens is you know, your brain. When does your brain start growing? Probably it's hardly growing in the early 20s, and it probably stops growing somewhere between 18 and 25.
Yeah.
So but if your brain is then set, I mean, the great thing is about epigenetics. Is just as the environment will inform which genes come on and off when you're growing up, they also can inform what genes go on and off later on in life.
Really?
And as your environment changes, your genetics will change, right? So what we know is that people whose parents come into recovery, and if they have addiction problems, they have a better chance of coming into recovery because of that environment around them. Switches genes on and off. What I know about myself, and I remember a doctor saying to me many years ago, he started telling me about his holiday in the Midwest of America, and I was like, what the fuck are you telling me this about? And he was saying that he'd been on the Oregon Trail where, you know, for 20 years, hundreds and hundreds of wagons had crossed this prairie, and there are now grooves in the prairie. And if you put a wagon on that prairie, the wheels would fall into those grooves and the wagon would have to go west. And as I was thinking, why are you telling me this? And he goes, your brain is like that prairie.
Yes.
And my experience was, after 3 years of being operated on and being given oxycodone. Those grooves just fell straight in.
Yeah.
And I was back in active addiction, and I lost 8 years of my life.
Yeah.
You know, having had quite substantial recovery, and then came out of that. God knows how, I almost died, and met you.
Yeah.
So you know, how deep are those grooves? I think has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Can you change where you tag a substance in your brain? I don't know. Well, thing about neurology, the brain, this medicine, is it's very, very young.
Yeah.
Okay? Freud was 120, 130 years ago.
Didn't he prescribe coke?
He took a lot.
Oh, right.
He took a lot of coke.
It's a wonder drug.
And which is why he's probably obsessed with sex, because he did a lot of coke. And he also did, I think, his thesis on use of cocaine, using cocaine to heal alcoholics. But he did a lot of coke.
I did try and show my mum that to persuade her that it was a good idea.
Yeah. He managed to stop at some point. But that you know, in those days, everybody's trying everything. And it was a way to interact. Like we use tea, coffee, alcohol now to connect with each other. And people have done that time immemorial. It hasn't made them addicts. Drugs don't make addicts.
No.
Trauma, brain growth makes addicts. There was something I wanted to say.
So neuroscience is very young?
Yes, that's where I was. Neuroscience is incredibly young. So Freud was like 130 years ago, beginning of, you know, and he's the father of the psyche, psychological stuff. Before that, you had witch doctors, you had people going to priests and getting exorcisms. You had all sorts of stuff. And then the first time we knew, because people weren't into cutting people's brains open, they tended not to live. So the first time we knew which bit of the brain did what was the First World War, where there were lots and lots of shrapnel brain injuries, and people survived. And that was the first time we knew that, if that lands there, this guy can't speak anymore. If that lands there.
Shell shock, is that what it is?
Well, no, I'm talking about the physical, the organic.
Actual.
Shell shock is a neurological response. It's trauma.
Yeah, so but this is bits of shrapnel.
What we used to call PTSD. This is actual physical organic damage into the brain. And so if someone got hit there, they can't talk. And that was the first time anybody had a clue that bit of the brain did this, or this bit of the brain did that. And that's 110 years ago.
So it's really young.
First time, really young. And then huge jumps when we get to MRI scans and brain scans, because then you can see what's firing where.
Yeah.
But we're still really in the stone age of brain medicine.
Well, I think that you have given such a concise description of why addicts do what they do. That was my aim with this episode.
Good.
And I can read your handwriting. People can't read mine.
I don't want them to read my handwriting because they can see I spelt it all right.
Oh, who cares?
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much for this. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I tell you what I would like to say is if you are working with somebody in early recovery, tolerance and compassion. Because, you know, what happens is this is like an amplifier. I always describe this like an amplifier. And if someone has been taking loads of this, and they've been taking loads of this, they've been taking loads of this, the person's volume on each of these substances, their ability to make it is down to zero. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because they haven't had to make it, because it's been coming from outside. And what will happen is you get something called PAWS, post-acute withdrawal symptoms, where the brain's trying to figure out where it should be. And you know, if you're listening to music on an amplifier and the bass is wrong, the treble's wrong, you know, the balance is out of set, it sounds wrong. So that person feels wrong, yeah? And sometimes it will turn it up too high, and then it will readjust it by turning it down again. And you know, if you're very young, it doesn't take that long, and if you're at my age, it can take, you know, a long time, depending how long you've been using, how much and what. The brain resetting itself. So the first year, couple of years of recovery is incredibly difficult.
It's crucial.
People. Yeah. And it's incredibly difficult for people, and they need a lot of help and mentoring.
Yeah.
And patience and tolerance. And being patient with addicts is a big ask.
But one of the biggest asks.
If you're aiming this at people's families and friends.
Well, I guess I just wanted people to kind of understand that, yeah, they're probably going to be acting like a little shit.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you have little shit for a time being.
Yeah.
Or not, or they die.
Which is best that they find another group of people trying to do the same things,
Exactly.
because they can tolerate each other better. And that's where recovery works best, because there's connection.
Yeah, it's the opposite of addiction, they say.
Yeah. And it's such a complex subject that an hour won't do it justice, half an hour won't do it justice, whatever. And there's lots more. So if someone is interested, we can put out a list of other stuff to look at.
Yes, we'll put some links at the end of this episode if you're interested.
Yeah, because there are really good people working in this field.
Yeah.
And most of them have far better knowledge than I do. Because they're in one area of the field.
What's a good first aid for somebody, someone's looking after an addict who's got, 24 hours, and they are about to press the fuck it button? What would you like? What would you say?
Breathe.
Because you do forget to breathe.
So people kept saying to me, you don't know how to breathe. And I was like, well, I'm alive. What's your problem? What are you talking about? But there's something that if you breathe fast, short into your chest, you will produce lots of neuroadrenaline, which is the fight-flight chemical.
Yeah.
It sets you up to either bash someone up or run away.
Yep.
Me, it's run away. And if you breathe slowly and deeply, you produce lots of endorphin, and that will calm someone down. And so when you're adrenalized, you're much more reactive. And when you're calmer, then you're much more responsive. And addiction's a very reactive occupation, because we decide like that, bang, I need this now.
Or I'm going to die.
Or I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And so the first thing is to teach someone how to breathe properly.
Yes. If they'll listen.
Not to stay alive, but to calm themselves down. And I had to learn.
Me too.
I had to learn how to breathe.
Yeah.
Meditation, fantastic to learn how to breathe when you're doing sort of pranic breathing. And you go, wow, I used to pay a fortune to feel this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, Will. Anything else?
Oh, God, there's loads. But and I know I've missed out a lot.
I think that you've explained everything exactly right. Like, we don't need to overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Because this is for everybody, you know. So I might know terms, or some people might know terms, but I think the way that you've done it is perfect. One other thing I wanted to ask you was, have you noticed, or has anyone noticed a rise in addiction since, social media, compare and despair, all that stuff?
So there is, because traditionally, I mean, for my generation, it was sort of like 10% of people who would take things would have a problem with them. Yeah, so it's a very small amount of the population that gets addiction, but what they are noticing is it's increasing now. And what they're putting that down to is bad nutrition. We've already discussed that. Fast food, stuff with no precursors to any brain chemicals in it. Screen use. Because if you're engaging with a screen, you're not engaging with a human being.
Yeah.
So those chemicals aren't getting fired. And also the type of screen use. So if it's a reactive screen use, if they're looking for you to like and swipe, and they're looking for short-term hit, that is stimulating the midbrain rather than the responsive part of the frontal lobe.
Yeah.
So yes, if you put together, how society is breaking down, the way capitalism informs society, that it's all about more, and screen use and the availability of screens, and how stimulating screens are, that people are going to quite stimulating things, the lack of eye contact, the lack of human connection. This is what they believe is informing the rise in the percentage of the population that will have substance misuse or problematic behaviors, things that come under the addiction hat.
Yeah.
And that can even be into sort of gaming and things like that.
Yeah.
Gaming addiction's huge. Gambling's on the rise. Problematic gambling. People always had a bet, but when they start doing it to the point that it's fucking with their, damaging their lives.
Yeah.
This is becoming more visible in society as we go on. And people gaming is because the game is more engaging to them than their reality.
Yeah. It's so, and they slip into it so easily. I've seen it.
Yeah.
And then there's also people a bit like me who'd like a good scroll, you know, but I've had to literally like limit myself because I can be holding my phone like this, and before I know it, an hour's gone by. That's an hour I'm not going to get back. And what did I do? I just watched a bit of crap. And it wasn't even that good, you know. So it was really fascinating to hear like the correlation between social media and instant gratification and the rise in addiction.
And if, you know, if the primary carer, mother, father, whatever, is really stressed and overworked and trying to get, you know, doing their 3 jobs or trying to get ends to meet or trying to get a meal together somehow, it's easier to put the kid in front of the TV.
Oh yeah.
That does not incite the brain to grow.
Some of my earliest memories are TV.
Yeah.
I remember CBBC, what's he called? Andy Sharp and Philip Schofield. The Broom Cupboard. Like, that's more of a memory for me than anything that actually happened.
I think it was my first drug because my reality was so appalling that, and if someone tried to switch the TV off and send me to bed, it was like someone was taking my drugs away many years later. It was like horrendous.
So your midbrain was already having a party.
It was already there. Sugar, TV, and then reading came next. I could live in these alternate realities of books and fantasy. And then at a very young age, I discovered needles.
Did you?
Yeah.
At a young age?
Yeah, about 15.
Wow. Gosh, there's so much I don't know about you. We need another episode.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Will. You've been very informative. And any last words?
There's no wisdom. I have none. I have none. No, I can't think of any last words. Edit all that
I'm not going to kill you. Like, there's no any last words.
I can't think of...